So the question comes up, what's the best milkweed for monarchs? And back in 2015, when I first started to do this, after some research, I decided it was what is called butterfly weed, or Asclepias tuberosa. And I decided that was everything that I was going to plant. I was just going to plant this plant, and it would provide the entire supply that I needed. So it didn't take long before I realized this wasn't going to work. And here's a little picture of a tussock moth that can definitely eat your entire supply of milkweed. And the other problem is you really need well-drained soil in order to grow this. So if you're in a clay area and you might have a lot of high rains and not well-drained soil, it's really prone to root rot. Since running out of milkweed is never a good thing, I reluctantly tried to grow common milkweed. So I had a neighbor who had a field full of them, and I transplanted a few plants, and I started with this one plant. In 2017, after the storm, you could see that it just laid over. I just had the one plant. So one of the disadvantages of common milkweed is I tend to stake them so they don't fall over. But of course, they're a great plant for bulk. They can't be beat for that. In 2018, I had resolved to use two milkweeds. I would still continue to use the, what I like to call tuberosa, and the common. By that time, I had more common milkweed. This is an example of how the root rot can really just destroy your food supply for tuberosa if you don't have the right growing conditions. So it's not a dependable food supply. So I still like to grow it, but I'm not going to be dependent on it. I am going to be more dependent on the common milkweed. So here I had a nice patch of it, so I didn't have to go scavenge for milkweed in the middle of the night when things ran out. This milkweed grows great in clay. As you can see, it's low maintenance compared to having this kind of bulk in a tuberosa, for example. And if you have clay soils and you're going to have a lot of rain, which probably in the future with climate change, the rains are going to be higher in terms of inches of rain per storm. So I would definitely recommend having a patch of this common milkweed, at least as a backup if you really don't want to use it as your primary source. But as soon as you use it, you'll notice that it'll become your primary source. Some of the reasons why that is that it allows for large feeding. You can kind of set it and forget it. You don't have to worry about, did it run out? It's really hard to get by without it once you use it. And it gives you the peace of mind to know that you're not going to run out of food, no matter how many eggs comes along onto your backyard. And it seems like every year it's a higher and higher number. If you build it, they will come, right? And of course, not only will the monarchs come, but all the predators will come as well. So in order to have a net gain, you know, they will have to be kept at bay as well. And your food supply will have to be maintained and be reliable. So the one con about common milkweed is that it's the one most likely to develop that black sooty mold on the leaves, because if you have aphid infestation, which probably most people do, and actually I'm going to be working on getting rid of the aphids a little bit more. I haven't really been minding the aphids in the previous years, but this year I did see that some of the leaves will develop that really black sooty mold. It was a plant that actually had sprouted very near the house, so it wasn't getting the rain, the level of rain to wash these leaves on a regular basis. So I would recommend that if you do grow common milkweed, that it is fairly well into the rain stream, if you will, without any trees or anything like that. You know, people complain about flies. Flies love that sooty mold and any other honeydew buildup, etc., etc. So when you are growing common milkweed, I would recommend, and this is something I'm probably going to do next year, I haven't really done it this year, is to go ahead and use every leaf from the bottom to top, because the bottom leaves are the ones that are going to go bad first, and you don't want to waste that source. So just go ahead. I used to leave the bottom leaves in order to give the plants some ability to produce energy after you cut every other leaf on the stem. What I'm going to do next year is just use every leaf, cut the plant back, and just have it grow a new stem, because trying to have it branch off just doesn't work with common milkweed. The other thing I'm going to do is going to cut the blooms, and so the energy won't go into producing these pods, and hopefully it would maybe cause more branching of the plant so that you would have new growth to pull some leaves off. But I'm thinking just use all the leaves, make sure there's no blooms, and just cut it off and just grow a new one. That will get rid of the sooty mold problem, and that may reduce some of the OE problems. So I'm thinking that's the way to go if you're doing common milkweed. So the last plant I wanted to use was swamp milkweed. And so in 2019 there was a plant sale, and I said, okay, we'll give it a shot. So there were 6 plants. 3 of them I planted in the ultra shady spot, maximum shade, I guess you might say. There is some sun, maybe 2 hours a day, something like that. And this is a picture of that group of plants. I also planted 3 plants on the really sunny side of the milkweed island, so that I would have all the different types of milkweed basically side by side to see how many eggs would be deposited on each of the plants. This is a picture of the island, the milkweed island. Here is the tropical milkweed on the left. Back in 2019, I grew 6 plants from seed and planted them here. And then this year I wanted to have them self-seed, because apparently they will do that. I'm in zone 7, so they won't just stay from year to year. They'll have to regrow. The self-seeded plant was much smaller than the ones I had started from seed earlier. They're not as big a plant for my area unless you started very early from seed. So although the tuberosa fell out of favor and it could not be the bulk of the food supply for the caterpillars, it is still used, and it's a favorite for the small caterpillars. Here's the swamp milkweed, and this is actually the 2 hours, during the 2 hours of sun that it gets. You can see even in the shade is very prolific in terms of blooms and pods. So if you have wet soils, which I think in the future, the soils are going to be wetter than usual or wetter than in the past. Swamp milkweed might be a good alternative, or might be a good way to make sure you have a good, reliable food supply. So blooms will generally attract the monarchs. Here we have a male monarch butterfly that must have come from a very long distance. It's got some weathered wings, and we can see that better on the next image. But anytime you have a visitor on your milkweed, you have to worry about OE on your food supply. So one of the things, this year I think my OE rate is going to be about 12%, which is not bad. But you can always improve on that. And I'm thinking about making the milkweed island an island where there is absolutely no blooms, so that the male monarch that's visiting this plant could not potentially deposit some OE on this plant. So I'm going to have two islands, a milkweed island and a nectar island in the other corner of the yard, so that those plants will have the blooms and the pod source for the following year for seeds. But there will be a dedicated sort of bloom-free island of milkweed to avoid visitors that could potentially cause an OE problem. So it'll be interesting to see if there are more eggs on the bloomless plants versus the blooming plants, or if there is a difference or not. So here is the visitor. Again, we can see there's a part of the wing missing here, scratch wings here. This is on a butterfly bush, and unfortunately, even though it is invasive species, and it's great species for feeding butterflies, because you want these visitors to come through, and you want to be able to provide them some food for their migrations. In summary, I have started with one milkweed, which I thought was the best, and over the years I have tried the other milkweeds, and I've been able to compare them side by side in a full sun. So we had the Tuberosa, then I had the common milkweed, I added some swamp milkweed, the regular swamp, and then another swamp called Ice Ballet, which is a little bit thinner and daintier and has white blooms, and also the tropical milkweed. Since I see all monarch generations, it seems that at least this year, I have eggs starting from May 4th all the way to September 9th. Hopefully I don't see any more eggs. But that is a huge span, and that basically spans, I believe, the entire generations of all the monarchs that are migrating. I am at around 40 degrees north latitude, so I'm pretty far north for even seeing the generation coming from Mexico. But for this year, I saw it for the first time on May 4th, which was amazing. So on May 4th, I did see the butterfly visiting, and at that time I really only had one plant for the eggs to be laid on, and that was the common milkweed. There really wasn't any other choice at that time, so I was pretty happy to have the common milkweed. So I think if you do get into that situation where you're pretty far north and you're seeing the first generation coming from Mexico, and you want to have the ability to help that generation, then having common milkweed would be probably the best option. Then later on, I was against swamp milkweed, but when I saw that swamp milkweed had a lot more eggs on it than common milkweed. I was a little bit shocked. I would have thought common would have been preferred over swamp, but I did have a comparison that happened around June 27th, 2019, where I counted the eggs on each of the plants. The shady swamp milkweed was the one that this one butterfly, I guess, had picked or selected. Maybe because that butterfly had been raised on swamp, who knows? And then the latest eggs that I found, which was September 9th, there were 16 eggs that were laid on Tuberosa. And that was mainly because it was new growth. It was after a caterpillar had stripped the plant bare to the stem. And usually Tuberosa does a pretty good job of growing back. Probably better than common milkweed or any other milkweed for that matter. That is one advantage for Tuberosa. There were 3 eggs on 2-inch common milkweed plants. I was starting to cut the common milkweed down to the ground. And when you do that, sometimes you'll get new growth, brand new plants coming up. And they were like 2 inches, maybe 3 inches. I noticed the monarchs will scour the ground for any small new shoot and lay an egg on it, even though there's probably not enough milkweed there to support the caterpillar for the entire 15 days. They definitely prefer any new growth or new shoots. And at the end of the season, that will either be a tuberosa or maybe a common milkweed if you're cutting them back earlier. I haven't really cut back the swamp to see if it would do the same thing. I'm guessing it would not. Tropical milkweed was always there, but it didn't seem to be a favorite. It never seemed to have more eggs than any other option that was available. I'm still using it. I'm still going to grow it, and I think I might even grow it from seeds so that it's bigger and taller in my area for the season, because apparently it's helpful to combat OE. So because of the high degree of poisonous chemicals that it has. I'm still going to be trying to feed the caterpillars some tropical milkweed every now and then. So for me, if you were to ask me which one is the best, I would say I would keep all of the 4 that I have at this time. They all have advantages. They will all collect eggs for different times of the year. So I would not stop any of them. I would use all 4. And actually I'm going to try 2 more varieties next year to see how they work out. I'll give you an update then to see how those milkweeds worked out in comparison with the rest.